The tournament arena changed into a massive holographic battlefield that looked completely real. The walls disappeared, and suddenly the fighters were standing in what looked like a destroyed alien city with broken buildings and smoking craters everywhere. The sky was dark red and lightning flashed between strange purple clouds. Commander Kai announced the rules from his floating platform high above the battlefield. Each warrior would face waves of combat robots that got stronger and more dangerous with every round. The robots were designed by the best military engineers in the galaxy to test fighting skills to the limit. Most warriors could barely defeat 50 robots before getting eliminated from the tournament. The first wave started, and mechanical spiders the size of small vehicles came crawling out of the ruined buildings. Each spider had 8 razor-sharp legs that could cut through metal and plasma cannons mounted on their backs that shot deadly energy beams. Their red sensor eyes scanned for targets while making clicking sounds that sent chills through the watching crowd. The Proxima warriors charged forward with loud battle cries, swinging massive energy hammers that sparked with electricity. They smashed into the spider robots with incredible strength, but the machines were fast and kept dodging their attacks. Plasma beams shot everywhere as the warriors and robots fought in brutal close combat. The Krell soldiers moved together like parts of one mind, forming perfect battle formations. They advanced slowly while shooting coordinated volleys from their energy rifles. When one soldier moved left, the others adjusted their positions automatically to give him cover. Their shared brain made them work together better than any other species could manage. The mech lords simply walked forward and started shooting everything they saw. Their arm cannons fired streams of superheated plasma that melted anything they hit. When spider robots jumped at them, the cyborg warriors caught them in metal hands and crushed them like toys before throwing the broken pieces aside. But everyone stopped fighting when they saw what Hana was doing. She moved across the battlefield, like water flowing around rocks. When spider robots shot plasma beams at her, she was already somewhere else, rolling behind cover or sliding under their legs. She seemed to know where each attack was coming before the robots even aimed their weapons. Her simple projectile guns made sharp cracking sounds as she fired metal bullets at weak points in the robot armor. She did not waste shots trying to destroy the heavily armored bodies. Instead, she targeted the joints where legs connected to bodies and the sensor clusters that controlled their movements. Each shot was perfectly placed and every bullet found its target. One spider robot jumped at her with all 8 legs spread wide, ready to slash her with razor claws. Hana dropped flat on her back, and as the machine passed over her, she shot upward, hitting the power core in its belly. The robot crashed into the ground behind her and stopped moving, while she rolled back to her feet without even looking at it. Another robot tried to sneak up on her from behind, but somehow she knew it was there. She spun around and threw one of her simple tools directly into its main sensor eye. The machine stumbled blindly into a wall, and Hana finished it off with 2 quick shots to its control systems. Within minutes, Hana had destroyed 12 spider robots while barely seeming to try. She had not been hit once and was not even breathing hard. The other warriors were still struggling with their first few opponents, using heavy weapons and energy shields to slowly fight through the mechanical nightmares. The crowd watched in complete silence, trying to understand what they were seeing. This small human was making the combat robots look slow and clumsy. She moved like she could predict exactly what they would do next, and always positioned herself perfectly to avoid their attacks, while striking at their weak points. The second wave began, and new robots emerged from the ruins. These were different from the spiders. They looked like metal wolves with glowing red eyes and jaws full of spinning saw blades. They could run faster than most vehicles, and their claws could dig through solid rock. When they howled, the sound was like metal scraping against metal. The wolf robots spread out and began hunting in coordinated packs, just like real wolves. They tried to surround individual warriors and attack from multiple directions at once. Several fighters found themselves completely overwhelmed as the mechanical predators worked together to bring them down. But Hana watched their pack behavior and smiled slightly. She had seen this before back home on Earth. Wolves always hunted, the same way whether they were made of flesh or metal. They would try to separate prey from the group, then attack the weakest target first. Once you understood their pattern, they became predictable. She let 3 wolf robots think they had trapped her in a corner between 2 collapsed walls. They approached slowly with their saw blade jaws spinning, ready to tear her apart. At the last second, she jumped straight up, using pieces of rubble to climb higher than they expected. The wolves crashed into each other as she dropped down behind them and shot each one in the back of the head where their control processors were located. More waves followed, each one more dangerous than the last, acid-spitting biorobots that could dissolve metal with their green saliva. Flying machines that attacked from above with laser talons. Shape-changing robots that could look like anything until they struck without warning. But every new challenge seemed familiar to Hana in some way. The acid spitters moved like the poisonous creatures she had learned to avoid in Earth swamps. The flying attackers hunted like the giant birds of prey from her home mountains. The shape-changers used ambush tactics similar to the camouflaged, predators that hid in Earth forests. By the end of the first day, Hana had destroyed over 400 combat robots. Other top warriors were celebrating if they managed to reach 100 kills. The tournament officials kept checking their computers to make sure there was no mistake in the counting, but the numbers were correct. News of the mysterious human spread through the space station like wildfire. Alien generals requested copies of the fighting footage to study her techniques. Military scientists wanted to examine her weapons to understand how such simple tools could be so effective. Reporters tried to interview her, but Hana just answered their questions with short, simple responses. When they asked her how she had learned to fight so well, she said she grew up camping and hunting back home. When they asked about her weapons, she explained they were just basic tools that any human could buy in stores. When they asked if she thought she could break the ancient Galactic record, she just shrugged and said she would do her best. That night, while other warriors rested and prepared for the next day, Hana sat quietly cleaning her weapons and thinking about home. She missed the forests and mountains of Earth where real challenges waited around every corner. These tournament robots were interesting, but they followed programmed patterns that made them easier to predict than the wild animals she was used to facing. Tomorrow would bring stronger opponents and greater challenges, but Hana was not worried. Earth had taught her that survival meant adapting to whatever came next, and she had been adapting her whole life. The giant space station floated in the darkness between stars like a metal city. Inside the massive arena, thousands of aliens sat in floating seats watching the biggest event of the year. The Galactic Kill Tournament happened once every year, and warriors from across the galaxy came to prove they were the strongest. Commander Kai stood on the center platform with his 4 purple arms spread wide. His voice echoed through the arena as he spoke to the crowd. Today we will see if anyone can break the greatest record in galactic history, he said. For 800 years, no warrior has been able to beat the legendary Vex Blackclaw and his record of 2,847 kills in one weekend. The crowd roared when they heard that name. Vex Blackclaw was a draconian warrior who stood 12 feet tall with claws that could cut through spaceship metal. His black scales were harder than armor, and his red eyes had seen 3 centuries of battle. Even now, 800 years after his death, other warriors still told stories about his incredible fighting skills. Most aliens believed his record would never be broken. One by one, Commander Kai announced this year's fighters. First came the Proxima Clan warriors who had trained for battle since they could walk. Their muscles were like steel cables, and they could punch through concrete walls. The crowd cheered as 5 of them marched into the arena wearing heavy battle armor. Next came the Krell soldiers, who shared one giant brain across their entire species. They moved together like parts of one huge machine and could predict what their enemies would do before they did it. 20 of them stepped forward in perfect formation, carrying energy weapons that glowed bright blue. Then the mech lords appeared, and the arena shook with their heavy footsteps. These warriors had replaced most of their original bodies with metal parts and computer chips. Their arms ended in plasma cannons and their eyes shot laser beams. They looked more like walking tanks than living creatures. Many other famous fighters entered the arena. The Void Hunters who could turn invisible at will. The Crystal Warriors whose bodies were made of living diamond. The Fire Breathers who could melt steel with their breath. Each group was more dangerous than the last, and the crowd loved every moment. But then something strange happened. A small transport ship docked at the station and everyone turned to look. The ship was tiny compared to the massive war vessels the other fighters had arrived in. It looked old and beaten up like it had traveled very far to get here. The airlock opened, and out stepped a creature no one expected to see. She was small, barely reaching 5.5 feet tall with black hair, tied back in a simple way. Her skin was pale, and she had 2 arms and 2 legs just like some other species, but something about her seemed different. She wore simple gray clothing and carried weapons that looked very basic compared to the high-tech gear everyone else had. Her name was Hana Kim, and she came from a planet called Earth. The Galactic computer files said Earth was listed as Deathworld, classification, extreme hazard. Most aliens had never heard of this place, and those who had knew it was supposed to be impossible to live there. The files said the air was poisonous, the gravity was too strong, and deadly creatures lived everywhere. Hannah walked across the arena floor toward the registration desk. Her movements were smooth and quiet like a hunting cat. She did not look around at the crowd or seem impressed by the other warriors. She just filled out her forms and waited for her turn to fight. The crowd started to whisper and point. Was this some kind of joke, they asked each other? How could such a small, weak-looking creature think she could compete with the greatest warriors in the galaxy? Some aliens started laughing and making bets about how quickly she would lose. Commander Kai looked at his list and seemed confused. He checked the computer files twice to make sure there was no mistake. According to the records, Hana Kim had qualified for the tournament by completing the standard combat tests, but something seemed wrong. No creature from a death world had ever entered the tournament before. He announced her name to the crowd and explained that she came from Earth. Most aliens had to look up Earth in their data files to learn anything about it. What they found made them even more confused. Earth was listed as one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. The files said it was covered in deadly storms, had poisonous air, and was full of creatures that could kill almost anything. But if Earth was so dangerous, how could this small, quiet human be standing here looking so calm and relaxed? She did not have huge muscles or metal body parts or energy weapons. She just looked like an ordinary person who had wandered into the wrong place by accident. The betting pools started taking wagers on how long Hana would survive. Most aliens bet she would not last 5 minutes against the first wave of combat robots. Some bet she would run away before the fighting even started. A few thought she might be some kind of secret weapon in disguise, but even they did not think she could win. Hana stood quietly in the staging area, checking her simple weapons. She had what looked like projectile guns that shot small metal pieces instead of energy beams. She also carried some basic tools and supplies, but nothing that looked very impressive. Compared to the other warriors with their glowing armor and high-tech weapons, she looked like she was about to go on a camping trip instead of fight for her life. But there was something in her eyes that the aliens did not understand. She looked calm and focused, like someone who had seen danger before and knew exactly what to do about it. While other warriors practiced their fighting moves or checked their equipment one last time, Hana just stood still and watched everything around her. She was remembering the creatures she had fought back home on Earth, the massive bears that could crush a person with one swipe of their claws, the poisonous snakes that could kill with one bite, the wild cats that could track prey for days without making a sound. Growing up on Earth had taught her that everything was dangerous, and staying alive meant being smarter and faster than the things trying to kill you. The tournament was about to begin, and no one in the galaxy was ready for what was about to happen. The small human from the Death World was about to show them all what real fighting looked like. News of Hana performance spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it. On hundreds of worlds, aliens gathered around their viewing screens to watch footage of the small human-destroying combat robots with impossible ease. Military commanders studied her movements over and over, trying to understand her fighting techniques. Dr. Minho Park sat in the research station conference room, surrounded by the most famous alien scientists in the galaxy. He was one of only 12 humans who had been studying at galactic universities when Hana arrived for the tournament. Now everyone wanted him to explain how someone from Earth could be so deadly in combat. The conference room was filled with creatures from dozens of different worlds. Professor Zeelan from the crystal planet Hexara had a body made of living diamond that sparkled under the lights. General Vorth from the gas giant Nemesis floated in a special tank filled with methane atmosphere. Dr. Keela from the ice world Frozen had fur so thick she looked like a walking carpet. They all stared at Dr. Park with confusion and growing concern as he began to describe Earth. He pulled up holographic displays showing pictures of his home planet, and the alien scientists gasped in horror at what they saw. Earth looked like a nightmare world where nothing should be able to survive. The atmosphere contains oxygen, which is highly reactive and poisonous to most life forms, Dr. Park explained. The gravity is so strong it would crush creatures from low-gravity worlds. Massive storms with winds over 200 kilometers per hour regularly sweep across the surface, destroying everything in their path. Professor Zeelan clicked her crystal fingers nervously. "But surely your species lives in protected cities away from these dangers," she said. Dr. Park shook his head and showed them pictures of human settlements. "No," he said, "we live everywhere on the planet. In the hottest deserts where temperatures reach over 50 degrees. In frozen regions where it gets so cold that water turns solid. Even in the deep forests where massive predators hunt anything that moves." The alien scientists looked at each other with growing alarm. General Vorth bubbled anxiously in his methane tank. "What kind of predators?" he asked. Dr. Park switched to images of Earth animals, and the room fell completely silent. "Here we see a creature called a grizzly bear," he said, pointing to a massive brown animal. "They can weigh over 300 kilograms, and their claws can tear through metal. They can run faster than most vehicles and have jaws strong enough to crush bones. But surely these creatures avoid your population centers," someone suggested. Dr. Park laughed and shook his head. "Actually, they sometimes wander into human towns looking for food," he said. "Most humans learn as children how to behave around dangerous animals. We teach our young ones never to run from bears because that triggers their hunting instincts." The scientists stared in disbelief as he showed them more Earth creatures. Poisonous snakes that could kill with one bite. Giant cats that hunted by stalking prey for days without making a sound. Massive sharks with rows of razor-sharp teeth that patrolled the oceans. Tiny insects that carried diseases deadlier than most biological weapons. Dr. Kella wrapped her thick fur tighter around herself. "How does your species survive on such a hostile world?" she whispered. Dr. Park smiled and showed them pictures of human activities. "We adapt," he said. "We learn to read the behavior patterns of dangerous animals so we can predict what they will do. We develop tools and weapons to defend ourselves. Most importantly, we never stop moving and never give up no matter how bad things get." Meanwhile, in the tournament arena, Hana was proving his words true. The second day had begun, and the combat robots were much more dangerous than before. The tournament AI had activated scenarios that were normally reserved for training elite special forces from across the galaxy. Tentacled horrors emerged from the ground with dozens of writhing arms covered in poisonous spines. Each tentacle moved, independently trying to grab fighters and drag them down into hidden pits filled with acid. Most warriors had to use heavy explosives to destroy these creatures, and even then they usually lost several team members in the process. But Hana looked at the tentacle monsters and was reminded of the giant squids that lived in Earth oceans. She had studied their hunting patterns during her marine biology classes. Tentacled predators always tried to grab prey with their outer arms first, while keeping their main body hidden and protected. She waited until one of the creatures reached, for her then grabbed onto its tentacle and let it pull her toward its hidden center. Other warriors shouted warnings, thinking she had made a terrible mistake. But as soon as Hana got close to the main body, she used her projectile weapons to target the central nerve cluster that controlled all the tentacles. The entire creature collapsed in seconds. Next came crystalline predators that looked like living gemstones with sharp edges that could cut through molecular bonds. They moved by reshaping their bodies and could become almost any form they wanted. When they attacked, they would suddenly grow sword-like projections or wrap around their victims like crystal chains. The alien warriors found these opponents almost impossible to fight because they never knew what shape the crystals would take next. But Hana recognized their movement patterns from studying pack hunters in Earth-frozen regions. No matter what shape they took, they still had to move their mass from one location to another, and that created predictable momentum patterns. She began leading the crystal creatures into collisions with each other, using their own speed and weight against them. When they tried to surround her, she would dodge at the last second, causing them to crash into walls or other obstacles. Her simple metal bullets could not damage their crystal bodies directly, but she could target the stress points where their rapid shape changes created structural weaknesses. The most terrifying opponents were swarm creatures that moved like liquid death. They appeared as clouds of tiny flying robots that could merge together into larger forms or spread out to attack from all directions at once. Each individual unit was no bigger than an insect, but together they could overwhelm almost any defender. Other warriors tried to fight the swarms with area effect weapons that could destroy many units at once, but there were always more swarm units than they could possibly target, and eventually the tiny robots would find gaps in their defenses. Hana took a completely different approach. She had grown up dealing with insect swarms on Earth and knew that they always followed simple behavior rules. Swarms moved toward food sources and away from threats. They communicated through chemical signals or simple sound patterns. Most importantly, they had central coordination nodes that controlled group behavior. She stopped trying to destroy individual swarm units and instead focused on disrupting their coordination. She used smoke grenades to confuse their sensors and made loud noises to interfere with their communication signals. When the swarms lost coordination, they began attacking each other or flying in random directions. By the end of the second day, Hana kill count had reached 1,200 confirmed eliminations. She was still accelerating while other top competitors were starting to slow down from exhaustion and equipment failures. The tournament officials realized they were witnessing something that had never happened before in galactic history. The betting pools that had started as jokes about the small human were now frantically recalculating odds as the impossible became inevitable. Military observers from dozens of different empires were taking detailed notes and requesting copies of all combat footage, but perhaps most importantly, word was spreading throughout the galaxy about Earth and its incredible inhabitants. Planets that had been classified as uninhabitable Deathworlds were suddenly being reconsidered. If one small human could perform such incredible feats, what other surprises might be waiting on worlds the galaxy had written off as too dangerous to bother with? The ancient record was starting to look very fragile indeed. With only 4 hours remaining in the tournament, Hana kill count reached 2,840. The entire galactic community held its breath as she moved just 7 kills away from matching Vex Blackclaw legendary record. Every news network across 100 worlds had interrupted their regular programming to broadcast live coverage of this historic moment. The space station had become the center of the galaxy attention. Diplomatic ships from major empires hung in space nearby, filled with military observers taking detailed notes. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council had been called to discuss the implications of what they were witnessing. On countless worlds, aliens gathered around viewing screens, unable to believe what they were seeing. Inside the tournament arena, the AI system had been pushed far beyond its normal operating limits. Technicians worked frantically to keep the processors from overheating as the computer generated the most complex combat scenario in galactic history. Warning lights flashed red throughout the control rooms, but no one dared shut down the system now. Commander Kai's voice shook with excitement as he announced the final challenge. "Ladies and gentlemen of the galaxy," he said, "we are about to witness the ultimate test of warrior skill. The AI will now create a perfect storm scenario combining every type of opponent and environmental hazard we have seen today. This has never been attempted before and may never be attempted again." The arena transformed into a nightmare landscape that defied all logic and reason. The ground split open, revealing pits filled with acid that bubbled and hissed. Gravity fluctuated wildly, causing debris to fall upward one moment and crush downward the next. The atmosphere became a poisonous mix of gases that would kill most aliens within seconds of exposure. Lightning struck continuously from a sky that burned with unnatural fire. Temperatures swung between Arctic cold that froze metal and volcanic heat that melted stone. Magnetic fields strong enough to tear apart starships swept across the battlefield in random patterns. The very laws of physics seemed to be breaking down, and through this hellish environment came every type of opponent the AI could generate, all attacking at once in coordinated waves. Shape-shifting assassins worked together with reality-bending entities. Swarm creatures merged with tentacled horrors. Crystal predators coordinated attacks with holographic warriors from galactic history. It was chaos beyond imagination, and most observers believed no living being could possibly survive such conditions. The other remaining tournament competitors had long since been eliminated by challenges far less severe than this. Military experts calculated that even a full battalion of elite soldiers would be overwhelmed within minutes. But this was the moment that truly separated Hana from every other warrior in galactic history. Instead of being overwhelmed by the chaos, she seemed to thrive in it. Earth had taught her that survival meant finding opportunity in disaster and never giving up no matter how impossible the odds seemed. She moved through the hellish battlefield, like a force of nature itself, flowing around attacks that came from impossible angles and finding safe paths through environmental hazards that should have been instantly lethal. When gravity reversed, she used the change to launch herself at enemies they could not reach. When the atmosphere became poisonous, she held her breath and kept fighting. Her simple projectile weapons found their targets with mechanical precision, even as reality warped around her. She had learned to trust her instincts over her eyes when dealing with dimensional entities that could not be seen clearly. Her movement patterns adapted constantly to the changing conditions, never following the same path twice. The crowd counted, along as her kill total climbed through the final numbers. 2,845 brought her within 2 kills of the record. 2,846 put her just 1 elimination away from tying the greatest achievement in galactic combat history. Then came kill number 2,847, and the space station erupted in pandemonium. Hana had tied Vec's Black Claw record that had stood unbroken for 8 centuries. Aliens were screaming, cheering, crying, and fainting in the stands. Emergency medical teams rushed to treat spectators who had collapsed from the excitement. But Hana was not finished. She continued moving through the chaos with deadly efficiency, systematically eliminating every opponent the AI could generate. Kill 2,848 shattered the ancient record and made galactic history. The impossible had become reality. Her kill count continued climbing as she cleared the arena of enemies with ruthless determination. 2,900, 3,000, 3,100. The AI was running out of opponents to generate as its combat algorithms reached their absolute limits. Security teams throughout the space station struggled to maintain order as aliens from dozens of different species celebrated or rioted depending on their reaction to seeing their greatest legends surpassed. Some cheered for the incredible achievement they had witnessed. Others felt their cultural identity threatened by having their ancient heroes defeated. Military commanders frantically updated their strategic databases with new assessments of human combat capabilities. The species that had been classified as primitive and harmless was suddenly being reconsidered as potentially the most dangerous warrior race in the galaxy. Ambassador Ji-Wan Lee found herself surrounded by representatives from major galactic powers, all demanding immediate meetings to discuss military alliances, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. What had started as Humanity First appearance in galactic society had accidentally revealed them as a force that could not be ignored. In the research stations, Dr. Minho Park was fielding thousands of requests for information about Earth and human biology. Xenobiologists wanted to study human reflexes and pattern recognition abilities. Military scientists wanted to understand how such simple weapons could be so effective. Philosophers debated what it meant that the most dangerous planet had produced the most capable warriors. But perhaps the most significant change was happening in the galactic databases, where planet classifications were being quietly updated. Worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable Deathworlds were suddenly being reconsidered as potential sources of incredibly capable individuals. The galaxy understanding of what made life dangerous had just been completely revolutionized. As the tournament timer finally ran out, Hana total kill count stood at 3,247 confirmed eliminations. She had not just broken the ancient record, but completely shattered it by over 400 kills. The crowd fell silent as the magnitude of her achievement sank in. Commander Kai's voice was barely a whisper as he announced the final results. Ladies and gentlemen, after 800 years of standing unbroken, the galactic kill record has fallen. Hana Kim of Earth has achieved 3,247 confirmed eliminations in a single weekend tournament. The space station shook as millions of aliens across the galaxy reacted to those words. History had been made, and nothing would ever be the same again. The small, quiet human from the Deathworld had just announced to the universe that humanity had arrived, and they were not to be under. The final day of the tournament arrived, and excitement filled the space station like electricity in the air. Hana needed just over 1,600 more kills to break Vex Blackclaw ancient record, and everyone in the galaxy seemed to be watching. News networks across 100 worlds were broadcasting live coverage of what historians were already calling the most important combat event in galactic history. The tournament arena had been completely transformed for the final challenges. The holographic environment now showed a hellish landscape with rivers of lava flowing between jagged black rocks. The sky burned with green fire, and strange geometric shapes floated in the air, defying all natural laws. This was not meant to represent any real world, but rather a nightmare realm designed to test warriors beyond their absolute limits. Commander Kai announced to the crowd that today tournament AI would be unleashing classified military scenarios that had never been used in public competition before. These were training programs designed for elite special forces from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The difficulty level was so extreme that most military academies used them only for final graduation tests. The first wave of opponents that emerged were unlike anything seen in previous days. Shape-shifting assassins materialized out of thin air with the ability to perfectly mimic any form they had seen. They could look exactly like other competitors or even copy the appearance of tournament officials. Their bodies were made of programmable matter that could become any weapon they needed. Most warriors found these enemies almost impossible to fight because they never knew who to trust or where the real threats were coming from. The shapeshifters would pretend to be allies asking for help, then suddenly transform into deadly weapons when their targets got close enough to attack. But Hana had grown up in forests where camouflaged predators used similar tactics to hunt their prey. She had learned as a child that movement patterns and breathing rhythms were much harder to fake than visual appearance. She watched how each figure walked and stood and could identify the real assassins even when they looked exactly like her, fellow competitors. When a shapeshifter disguised as Commander Kai approached her, asking if she needed medical assistance, Hana noticed that its feet did not quite touch the ground in the same way a real person would. She shot it in the center, mass before it could complete its transformation into attack mode. The fake commander dissolved back into gray, programmable matter that splattered across the arena floor. Next came reality-bending entities that attacked through dimensional rifts in space itself. These creatures existed partially in normal space, and partially in alternate dimensions that followed completely different physical laws. They could reach through portals to grab fighters from impossible angles or shoot energy beams that curved around obstacles by traveling through folded space. The alien warriors found these opponents terrifying because all their training was based on understanding how normal physics worked. When enemies could attack from directions that should not exist or hide in spaces that had negative volume, their combat skills became almost useless. But Earth had taught Hana that reality was much stranger and more dangerous than most people realized. She had explored deep cave systems where optical illusions made passages seem to lead in impossible directions. She had survived in weather conditions where heat mirages and atmospheric distortions made it hard to tell what was real and what was just tricks of light and shadow. Instead of trying to understand the alien physics of the dimensional attackers, she simply focused on results. She could not predict where their attacks would come from, but she could watch for the telltale energy distortions that appeared just before each portal opened. She learned to dodge based on these warning signs rather than trying to track enemies she could not fully see. Her projectile weapons could not hit targets that were partially in other dimensions, but the bullets could disrupt the energy fields that kept the portals stable. When she shot at the right frequency and angle, the dimensional rifts would collapse, trapping the alien entities in whatever realm they had been hiding in. Then the Arena AI activated its most challenging program yet: perfect holographic recreations. Of history, greatest warriors began materializing on the battlefield. These were not just visual copies, but complete simulations based on detailed historical records and combat analysis. They fought with all the skills and knowledge of the original legends. The crowd gasped in recognition as famous champions from across galactic history stepped onto the battlefield. There was Korith the Blade Master, whose energy sword had never been blocked by any defense. Nexara the Mind Crusher, who could kill opponents just by thinking at them. Vel the Destroyer, whose plasma cannons could melt entire battleships. And finally, towering above them all, appeared the holographic form of Vex Blackclaw himself. The legendary Draconian stood 12 feet tall, with scales blacker than deep space, and claws that gleamed like polished metal. His red eyes burned with the fury of 3 centuries of warfare, and when he roared, the sound shook the entire arena. For the first time since the tournament began, Hana seemed to pause and consider her situation carefully. She was facing the greatest warrior in galactic history, recreated at the peak of his legendary abilities. Every movement he made showed perfect technique, refined through hundreds of years of combat experience. Vex began stalking toward her with predatory grace that reminded everyone watching why his record had stood unbroken for 8 centuries. His claws left deep scoring marks in the arena floor, and small flames leaked from between his razor-sharp teeth. He moved like death given physical form, and every step radiated absolute confidence in his fighting abilities. The two circled each other in the center of the hellish arena while the crowd watched in complete silence. This was the moment that would determine whether the ancient record would finally fall or continue standing for another 800 years. Vex attacked first with a claw strike that could have cut through starship armor, but Hana was not there when his claws reached the spot where she had been standing. She had read his body language and muscle tension patterns to predict his attack before he even began moving. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Vex fought with the accumulated skill of centuries, while Hana relied on instincts and adaptability that had been forged in the crucible of Earth's most dangerous environments. His claws carved through the air with lethal precision, while she flowed around his attacks like water around stone. Gradually, Hana began to understand the patterns in Vec's fighting style. He was incredibly skilled, but his techniques had been perfected against opponents who fought according to standard galactic combat doctrines. Earth had never developed those doctrines because humans had learned to fight by facing creatures that followed no rules except survival of the fittest. She started using techniques that no galactic warrior had ever encountered. Moves she had learned from watching how Earth predators hunted their prey. Strategies based on the behavior of pack animals working together to bring down larger opponents. Fighting methods that seemed random and chaotic but followed the deeper logic of natural selection. When the holographic Vex finally fell dissolving into particles of light, the arena erupted in chaos that threatened to tear the space station apart. Aliens who had never seen their greatest champions defeated were screaming in disbelief. Military observers from dozens of empires were frantically updating their threat assessments of human capabilities. But in the center of it all, Hana simply reloaded her weapons and prepared for the next wave of opponents. Her kill count was climbing steadily toward the ancient record, and she showed no signs of slowing down. The impossible was becoming inevitable, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months after the tournament, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The small space station that had hosted the competition had become a pilgrimage site where aliens from across the known worlds came to see where history was made. Tour guides pointed out the exact spot where Hana had defeated the holographic Vex Blackclaw, and souvenir shops sold replica weapons modeled after her simple projectile guns. Ambassador Jiwan Lee sat in her new office on the Galactic Council station, surrounded by stacks of requests that grew taller every day. Military alliances, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and research partnerships filled her desk from dozens of different species, all wanting to establish relationships with humanity. What had started as Earth's first contact with galactic civilization had accidentally made them one of the most sought-after allies in the galaxy. The phone rang constantly with calls from generals wanting to hire human military advisors. Scientists requested permission to study human biology and reflexes. Philosophers wanted to debate what it meant that the most dangerous planet had produced such capable warriors. Even entertainment companies offered massive contracts, hoping to make movies about the incredible tournament victory. But perhaps the most significant requests came from other Deathworld species who had been dismissed by galactic society for centuries. Creatures from high-gravity planets, toxic atmosphere worlds, and predator-infested systems were suddenly being reconsidered as valuable citizens rather than primitive survivors. The galaxy understanding of what made strength had been completely revolutionized. Captain Yuna Choi of the Earth Defense Force found herself leading the first human military mission to another star system. Her small ship carried just 12 people, but every galactic power wanted to know where they were going and what they planned to do. The humans were not trying to start any conflicts, but their mere presence changed the balance of power wherever they appeared. Her crew included specialists who had grown up in different dangerous environments on Earth. Mountain climbers who could function in low oxygen conditions, deep sea divers who understood pressure and hostile atmospheres, wilderness survivors who could adapt to any environment and find resources where others saw only death. They were heading to a contested star system where 3 different alien empires had been fighting for decades over mining rights. All sides had requested human assistance, but Earth had decided to send observers rather than pick favorites. Sometimes the threat of human involvement was more powerful than actually taking sides in alien conflicts. Meanwhile, Dr. Minho Park had become the most famous xenobiologist in the galaxy. His research station was flooded with requests to study the connection between dangerous environments and combat capability. Students from hundreds of worlds applied to study under him, hoping to understand how Deathworld conditions created such remarkable individuals. His latest research focused on cataloging all the planets that had been classified as too dangerous for civilization. Many of these worlds had been ignored for thousands of years because galactic society assumed nothing valuable could come from such hostile places. Now survey teams were being dispatched to investigate what kinds of life might have evolved in these extreme conditions. Early reports were already coming back with surprising discoveries. A planet with constant electrical storms had produced a species that could manipulate electromagnetic fields with their thoughts. A world covered in acid oceans was home to creatures that could dissolve any known material. A frozen wasteland had generated beings that could survive in the vacuum of space without protection. The galaxy was realizing that they had been ignoring entire categories of potential allies and enemies because they had misunderstood what made worlds valuable. Comfort and safety created certain kinds of civilization, but danger and challenge created entirely different strengths that might be even more important. Back on Earth, Hannah had returned to her quiet life as if nothing had changed. She declined interviews from galactic news networks and turned down offers to become a professional fighter or military instructor. When reporters managed to track her down at her small cabin in the mountains, she just smiled and said she preferred camping to traveling between stars. But her impact on human society was undeniable. Military recruitment offices were flooded with applications from people inspired by her example. Wilderness survival schools could not keep up with demand from students wanting to test themselves against Earth-dangerous environments. Even children games had changed as young humans practiced the movement patterns and awareness techniques they had seen her use. The most significant change was in how humans viewed themselves and their place in the galaxy. For the first time, they understood that growing up on Earth had given them abilities that other species envied, rather than weaknesses they needed to overcome. The planet that had seemed like a constant threat was actually their greatest advantage. Professor Kyung Han at Seoul National University led a research project documenting traditional human survival techniques that had never been written down before. Hunting methods passed down through generations of indigenous peoples. Combat techniques developed by martial artists over thousands of years. Survival strategies used by explorers who had pushed into Earth's most dangerous regions. All of these knowledge systems were being preserved and studied because the galaxy now understood they represented millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of cultural development focused on surviving in impossible conditions. What humans had taken for granted was actually the most advanced survival training program in the known universe. The galactic military academies began requesting human instructors to teach courses on adaptability and improvisation. Combat simulations, that had been considered impossibly difficult, were redesigned based on Earth environmental conditions. Students from peaceful worlds struggled to understand how humans could remain calm and focused when everything around them was trying to kill them. But perhaps the most important legacy of Hannah Victory was philosophical rather than practical. She had shown the galaxy that strength could come from unexpected places and that civilization's judgments about what was valuable might be completely wrong. The quiet human from the Deathworld had proven that sometimes the greatest warriors came not from the safest places, but from the most dangerous ones. As years passed, the tournament became known as the weekend that changed everything. Children across the galaxy grew up hearing different versions of the story, but they all carried the same message. Heroes could emerge from anywhere, and the most unlikely people might possess the most remarkable abilities. The ancient galactic record that had stood for 8 centuries was gone forever, replaced by a new standard that seemed just as impossible to break. But somewhere in the vast databases of galactic civilization, Earth classification had been updated one final time. It now read, Deathworld classification home of galactic champions, approach with extreme respect. The small blue planet that had once been dismissed as too dangerous to bother with had become the most important world in the galaxy. And in a quiet cabin in the mountains, Hana Kim continued her simple life knowing that she had changed the universe forever just by being herself.